I'm John Swartz with USA Today. I'm the tech reporter and here with Brian Solis. About a year ago, we were talking about Pivot, which was the first time you had this conference. And can you maybe reiterate what the aim of the conference is, since there are so many in social media?
Well, last year, it was the first year that I took over the conference, but it was the second annual Pivot conference. And we used the theme, the rise of the social consumer. What we didn't want to do last year was have another social media conference for many reasons. One, because there's a lot of great conferences out there. But two, I work in the world of enterprise, and no enterprise has changed because of social media. They've changed because they recognize the need to. And last year, we wanted to introduce them to a new type of customer, a different breed of consumerism, if you will. And this year, we are focusing on the rise of the social business, which is taking a look at the inside of the organization in order to more effectively collaborate externally.
So give us an example of a company that's adapted using that theory that you just mentioned. Is there going to be a company, say at Pivot, that's going to talk about how they've changed fundamentally or how they've adapted to their social media customer?
Well, I think what we learned last year, one of the best examples was a company called Aramark. You might know in the food vending uniform business, 250,000 employees, had looked at entertaining a social media strategy. And they brought a lot of smart people around the table to say, why do we need a social media strategy? Which is a question I think a lot of businesses...
I mean, in light of questions about Facebook and how effective it is in terms of major big box vendors like Gap, Nordstrom, some of those issues, that is a legitimate question.
Well, it is a legitimate question, and I actually want to come back to that one in a second. The thing that they realized, though, is that they weren't prepared internally to address what could happen externally. If this happens, in this scenario, who's going to do this? How does information come into the organization? What happens within the organization? They realized that they needed to focus first on employees, processes, governance, things that, well, make a company work. They spent the next year building that out, and they told their story last year at Pivot, which I thought was really fascinating. A lot of people learned about it. In fact, Dana Vetter, who was the person leading that effort, has written several articles about it, sort of continue on the discussion to help other businesses learn what's possible. This year, we're going to continue that dialogue because that can't just be the only great example out there. And I also want to talk about the idea that, even though we call it a social business, it's not just because of social media. It's the pure vernacular of social. It is a business that can engage with customers and employees.
Can I just interject? So does that have something to do with a story I'm working on about the future of retail? Does that have something to do with just this urgency of now among customers? I know that sounds kind of strange, but I keep hearing that phrase from Google, Facebook, Visa, Square. They all talk about that,
right,
and how it changes the way they're going to do business and how it's going to benefit the customer, especially in the next couple of years, and as well as themselves. And if they don't adapt, they say a lot of companies are going to go by the wayside, like well-known companies.
So the urgency of now is a big underlying current of The End of Business as Usual, the book that I wrote and just published. And it was about how customers are empowered. They're making decisions, not just in real time, but at the right time. And it's for businesses to understand those new touch points because they can shape and shift a decision in their favor. One great example is the story you hear quite often about Best Buy, where someone comes into Best Buy, scans...
That's a
showrooming for Amazon, because it's an old school policy, but when someone comes up to the customer service desk and says, can you match this price? They'll say, no, we can't, because that's not a printed advertisement. And so something as simple as that sends the customer away. And so the urgency of now is sort of competing for that moment.
Isn't Sears, isn't that an example? I think the Journal recently wrote about Sears with real-time pricing and real-time inventory. I've actually even talked to the Oakland A's a long time ago about real-time pricing for food at their games, just to adapt to, say, for instance, a consumer who says, look, can you match this price?
Absolutely. We are being groomed on a price culture. However, that being said, to react to that, I call it digital Darwinism. If you cannot adapt to this opportunity as technology and society is changing or expectations are changing, then by default, you become irrelevant or you start to become irrelevant. Ultimately, though, businesses are going to have to demonstrate that, yes, they can compete for now, or the urgency of now, but at the same time, they have to find new ways to introduce value so that it can't just become a price war.
Well, what's the window of being able to adapt? I mean, do they need to do it within 2 years? I was talking to the head of retail at Google today, and he said it's accelerating so fast that they really don't have a choice. They have to make fundamental changes quickly. And you see almost every day some sort of announcement from a JCPenney or a Macy's along those lines.
Well, this is, and I'm going to pivot back to the conference for a minute.
Right.
The reality is that it's not an overnight thing, right? This is a growing segment of consumerism. And at some point, this becomes pervasive in terms of your market. You have a long window to transform, but you have to start to recognize first that you need to, and then start to build the infrastructure. And that's what we're focusing on in the conference. But the thing about some of these, I don't want to name names, but you're not going to win just by technology. People are changing not just in how they find prices and products, but they want to be aligned with those products for many reasons, because it's a form of identity, because it's a form of psychology, what have you. So the businesses are going to have to change not just the infrastructure and the technology, but also from an aspirational standpoint. Why would people want to be your customer?
Right. You mentioned you wanted to circle back to Facebook. Was it you who famously had the turn of phrase of FCommerce kind of first failed commerce because of the poor track record they had with some of the larger retailers? Or?
That was the beginning of the quote. The latter part of the quote was it was a result of the uninspired. And that was that most FCommerce initiatives that failed were simply bolt-ons onto Facebook, where they took their e-commerce strategy and threw it on as a tab. And that's never going to work. Because indeed what everybody's in agreement on is that Facebook isn't the place where you're just going to go and shop and browse like you would a traditional website.
A lot of this is going to be covered at the Pivot conference in a few months?
This October, it's one of the many things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at employees. We're going to look at transformation. We're going to look at how to break social media and mobile out of their silos. We're going to look at user experience. We're going to look at how to change the customer and employee relationships now and over time.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, John.